There was a moment just before everything changed, when I thought I could still stop it. I remember it like it was yesterday, the hot, suffocating afternoon in late May, the air thick with the promise of summer, but for me it was as though time had stopped. I was 16 and sitting in the back corner of Mr. Walker's algebra class, trying to make myself invisible. I wasn't popular, I wasn't disliked either, I was just there. The sort of girl who melted into the walls. But he noticed me. Max Carter was everything I wasn't: confident, effortlessly cool, the kind of guy who could make you feel like you were the only person in the room. At least that's what I thought at the time. His smile had a way of lighting up the darkest corners of my world, making me believe that, for once, I was seen. I wasn't the shy, awkward girl who tripped over her words in class. I was someone for him, at least. It wasn't supposed to happen. We were both too young, too naive. He was just a classmate, a fleeting distraction in the grand scheme of my life. But I had always been the type to believe that life would follow a neat, predictable path. College, career, the American dream version of success. But you never really know how far one decision can set you off course. That night was the one that changed everything. It was a silly, drunken party at Emily Roberts' house. I never planned on staying long. I had homework, a promise to my mom that I'd be home early. But when Max kissed me in the dark corner of the living room, none of that mattered. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was just a moment of reckless abandon. But that moment, that one act, was about to shatter my whole world. I didn't realize it right away. Not until the nausea set in. Not until my body betrayed me with its signals. And then the silence, the suffocating, isolating silence. I was too scared to tell anyone, too embarrassed to face the shame I was already starting to feel creeping in. I wasn't even sure what I was afraid of. Was it Max's reaction? The judgment of my classmates? Or was it the look in my mother's eyes that I knew would come when I finally spoke the words aloud? By the time I gathered the courage to take the test, I already knew the result. I'd felt it in the pit of my stomach. The nausea, the dizziness, the absence of my period. It was all pointing to one irrefutable truth: I was pregnant. I sat in the bathroom, staring at the plastic stick in my trembling hands, trying to breathe through the suffocating panic. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger. There was no trace of the girl who had thought she had it all figured out. The girl who dreamed of becoming a lawyer or maybe a teacher, someone who could make a difference in the world. That girl was gone. The next few days passed in a haze. I could barely bring myself to tell my parents. I was sure they'd disown me, send me away, never speak to me again. What did I expect? After all, I'd let them down. I hadn't lived up to their expectations of me, of perfection, of doing everything right. And now I had become something they could never accept. When I finally broke the news to my mother, she cried. My father barely spoke, his silence louder than any words could have been. They sent me to my grandmother's house in another city, in hopes that time, distance, and her steady presence would somehow erase the problem. But there was no erasing it. Not for me, not for my parents, not for anyone. I left behind the life I had known, the classmates who whispered behind my back, the teachers who looked at me with pity, the friends who slowly began to avoid me as if I were infected with something contagious. I left it all behind, but the shame, the guilt, the whispers, they followed me. I arrived at my grandmother's house a broken girl, but the time I spent there didn't break me further. Instead, it shaped me. I found a sort of strength in her quiet, unspoken wisdom, in the way she loved me without asking questions, without judgments. It was there that I learned to breathe again. I enrolled in a nearby college and, after much contemplation, decided to keep the baby. People would have judged me for that too. At my age, it wasn't just a matter of being pregnant. It was a matter of becoming a mother when the world expected you to be someone's daughter. But I didn't care. I wanted this child. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't the mistake everyone seemed to think I was. The first few months were hell. College was supposed to be a fresh start, but nothing about it felt fresh. It felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. The other students seemed to have it all together, and I was just trying to survive, to make it through each day without falling apart. Then there was the pregnancy, the exhaustion, the sickness, the loneliness. But amidst all of it, there was also a kind of peace that came with the growing life inside me. When the baby moved for the first time, I didn't feel like a failure. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt like I had purpose. I gave birth to a son. His name was Oliver. He was perfect. And even though I was barely out of childhood myself, I knew that I would give him everything I had. I would raise him to be something no one expected, not the mistake they thought I was, not the girl they shunned, but someone extraordinary. Took years, but I did it. And now Oliver is a name everyone knows. I never intended to come back. It had been almost 10 years. 10 years since I packed up my life and fled to my grandmother's house in a city far away. A place where no one knew me, no one judged me. 10 years since I had dropped out of high school. Since the whispers, the stares, the mocking laughter of classmates had followed me out the door. And I had resolved silently that I would never let those people matter again. They didn't deserve the power to shape my future. But 10 years later, I stood at the edge of the town I had once called home. It wasn't supposed to be this way. It wasn't supposed to be me. A mother of a world-famous musician, a woman who had defied every expectation. But here I was, my son in tow, coming back not as the girl who had been cast aside, but as the mother of Oliver Gray, the child prodigy everyone in the world was talking about. I remember when the phone call first came. I was sitting in the tiny living room of our New York apartment, my fingers grazing the familiar piano keys as Oliver worked on his latest composition, something he'd been fiddling with for days. He was only 16 then and already a star, already the subject of countless articles, music videos, and rave reviews from critics who swore he was a genius in the making. Every note he played felt like a promise to the world that he would leave an indelible mark, not just on the music industry, but on the hearts of everyone who heard him. It was an afternoon like any other, until the phone rang. I answered it with a mix of curiosity and dread. The way you answer a call when you know deep down it's going to change everything. "Is this Mrs. Gray?" the voice asked. I froze. No one called me Mrs. Gray. It was always Martha or Mom. The formal tone struck me like a blow. "This is Officer Lyons. We're contacting you in regards to a gathering that's being held tomorrow in your hometown. We're inviting the parents of all the alumni, and we were hoping you'd attend." The words hit me with a strange force. A gathering? A reunion? That wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was that I hadn't been a part of that world in so long. I wasn't just an alumna. I was the girl they had turned their backs on, the girl they had whispered about in the halls of Rivercrest High, the girl who'd left town in shame, carrying a child that no one thought would amount to anything. That I had never imagined that, one day, I would return, not as the awkward teenager who had been branded, but as the mother of someone the world was beginning to call a musical prodigy. But here we were. We arrived in Rivercrest under the cover of night, the small town barely recognizable after all these years. The streets that had once felt like a maze of judgment now felt almost quaint, nostalgic in a way that both comforted and unsettled me. As we drove past the familiar places, my old high school, the diner where I used to hang out with friends I had long since lost track of, the library where I spent hours studying for tests I barely passed, I wondered what they all thought. Did they even know? Did they remember me? I didn't know, but I would find out soon enough. Oliver was asleep in the back seat, his face pressed against the window, a small, serene smile on his lips. He had no idea of the weight of the past I was carrying with me. For him, the world was already open, and he had the talent, the drive, the determination to walk through any door, any stage with an ease I had never known. The next morning, as we walked into the venue of the alumni gathering, I could feel the eyes on us, on me. I caught sight of a few familiar faces, teachers who once shook their heads at my choices, classmates who whispered behind my back, but they all turned their attention to Oliver. There he was, dressed in black jeans and a simple shirt, his long hair a little messier than I'd like, but still undeniably striking. At 16, he was already taller than most men in the room, his presence so magnetic that no one seemed to notice the mother at his side, at least, not at first. And then it happened that a small group of women who had once called themselves my friends approached us. They were older now, their faces etched with years of their own struggles and triumphs. They looked at Oliver with awe, the recognition in their eyes clear before they even spoke. "Is this your son?" one of them asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled, a smile that wasn't quite a smile but more of a quiet acknowledgement. "Yes," I said softly. "This is Oliver." "Wait," another one said, her voice shaking. "Oliver Gray? The musician?" I nodded. They stared at him in silence for a moment, their eyes shifting between me and him. The silence was deafening. But then it broke and the questions came. "He's incredible," one of the women said, her voice barely containing the awe. "I've heard his music on the radio. He's already touring? How did you?" "I raised him," I said, my voice steady. "I raised him just like I would have raised any child. He's special, yes, but he's also my son. That's all he ever needed." Their mouths opened and closed, their expressions a blend of disbelief, envy, and something darker, perhaps regret. They had all known me as the girl who had made a mistake, the one who had been so easily discarded. They hadn't seen me as someone who could ever give birth to greatness. But that was the thing about life, it doesn't care how many mistakes you make. It doesn't care how many times you fall. It only matters that you get back up, that you keep going. And Oliver? He didn't just get up. He soared. The conversation shifted quickly, as if they were too uncomfortable to confront the reality of my life, of his life, so they did what most people do. They moved on to safer topics. But I could see the spark of realization in their eyes. She's different. She's not who we thought she was, star. And that was enough. I didn't need their validation. I had never needed it. I had built my life with my own hands, my own love, and my own strength. Later that evening, after the gathering had ended, I stood by the window of our hotel room, staring out into the night, feeling the weight of everything settle into place. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. The world would know my son's name, but it was my quiet, steady presence behind the scenes that had allowed him to get there. The boy who had once been nothing more than a whispered mistake in a small town was now someone whose music touched the hearts of millions. And as I turned to face Oliver sitting on the edge of the bed with a notebook full of new compositions, I realized something else. I had never been the one to make a mistake. I was the one who had created greatness. And finally, it was time for them to see.